In a small town nestled in the heart of the Midwest where everyone knew each other by name, there lived a man named Mark Reynolds. He wasn't just any ordinary resident. He was one of the most respected figures in the community. Mark had served as a police officer for over a decade, and his reputation preceded him wherever he went. People admired him not only because of his uniform, but also because of the values he stood for: honesty, integrity, and fairness. Mark's journey to becoming a cop hadn't been easy. Growing up in a modest household, he learned early on about hard work and sacrifice. His father worked long hours at a factory while his mother juggled multiple jobs to make ends meet. Despite their struggles, they instilled in Mark the importance of doing what was right, no matter how difficult it might seem. After finishing high school, Mark joined the Marines, driven by a desire to serve something greater than himself. Those years shaped him into the disciplined and principled individual he would later become. When Mark returned home after completing his military service, he decided to pursue a career in law enforcement. To him, being a police officer meant more than just wearing a badge. It meant protecting people, standing up for those who couldn't defend themselves, and ensuring that justice prevailed. And so, with determination burning in his heart, Mark enrolled in the police academy. It wasn't an easy path. There were grueling physical tests, endless hours of studying, and moments when doubt crept into his mind. But he persevered. When he finally graduated and pinned on his badge for the first time, he felt a deep sense of pride knowing that he was ready to dedicate his life to serving others. As an officer, Mark quickly became known for his unwavering commitment to duty. Whether it was responding to late-night calls, helping stranded motorists, or breaking up heated arguments, he approached every situation with patience and professionalism. Unlike some of his colleagues who cut corners or turned a blind eye to certain offenses, Mark believed in following the rules to the letter. He didn't care if someone was rich or poor, powerful or powerless. Everyone deserved equal treatment under the law. This philosophy earned him respect from many in the community, especially those who felt marginalized or overlooked. But Mark's dedication to justice also made him enemies. There were individuals in town who preferred things to stay quiet, who didn't want their wrongdoings exposed. These people saw Mark as a threat, a thorn in their side. They whispered behind his back, accusing him of being too rigid, too idealistic. Some even tried to intimidate him, hoping he'd loosen up or look the other way. But Mark refused to budge. He knew that compromising his principles, even once, would set a dangerous precedent. So, he kept doing what he believed was right, regardless of the consequences. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Mark found himself patrolling the streets of the town's wealthiest neighborhood. This area was home to sprawling mansions, manicured lawns, and influential families, including the Carters. Charles Carter, the town's mayor, lived here with his wife and their only child, Emily. The Carters were pillars of the community, or at least, that's how they appeared on the surface. Beneath their polished exterior, however, lay secrets that few dared to uncover. Mark had never interacted much with the Carters personally, though he'd heard plenty about them. Mayor Carter was often praised for his leadership, yet rumors circulated about shady deals and favoritism within his administration. Emily, on the other hand, was a different story altogether. A socialite in her mid-20s, she was the epitome of privilege. With her designer clothes, flashy car, and entourage of friends, she seemed to live a charmed life. But whispers about her behavior occasionally reached Mark's ears. Rumors of reckless driving, underage drinking, and even shoplifting. None of these allegations had ever been proven, though, and Mark dismissed them as idle gossip. That night, however, everything changed. As Mark drove through the quiet streets, his radio crackled to life. Dispatch informed him of a disturbance at a boutique located on the outskirts of the wealthy neighborhood. The caller reported that a customer had been accused of stealing, and tensions were running high. Without hesitation, Mark flipped on his sirens and sped toward the scene. Little did he know that this seemingly routine call would alter the course of his life forever. When Mark arrived at the boutique, he immediately noticed the commotion. The shop owner, A middle-aged woman with frazzled hair and flushed cheeks was standing outside, visibly upset. Inside, a group of people had gathered around a young woman who looked distinctly out of place among the racks of expensive clothing. Her designer handbag rested on the counter, and her expression was a mixture of defiance and irritation. It didn't take long for Mark to recognize her. It was Emily Carter. The shop owner wasted no time explaining what had happened. According to her, Emily had entered the store earlier that afternoon and browsed through the jewelry section. She picked up a necklace worth several $1,000s, tried it on, and then placed it back on the display stand. Or so it seemed. When the shop owner reviewed the security footage later, she noticed something startling. Emily had slipped the necklace into her purse before walking out without paying. Confronted with the evidence, Emily denied the accusation vehemently, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. Mark listened carefully to both sides of the story, his training kicking in as he assessed the situation. He asked to see the surveillance footage, which clearly showed Emily taking the necklace and concealing it in her bag. Though the video was grainy, there was no denying what had occurred. Still, Emily continued to protest, her voice rising with each passing moment. "You can't arrest me," she snapped, glaring at Mark. "Do you know who my father is? You'll regret this." Her words struck a nerve, but Mark remained calm. He reminded himself that emotions often ran high during such incidents, and it was his job to remain impartial. Following protocol, he informed Emily of her rights and placed her under arrest, confiscating the necklace as evidence. As he led her to his patrol car, he couldn't shake the feeling that this case would attract far more attention than usual. And unfortunately, he was right. What started as a straightforward theft investigation soon spiraled into chaos. News of Emily's arrest spread like wildfire, thanks in part to social media and local gossip. By morning, nearly everyone in town, and beyond, knew about the incident. The headlines painted conflicting narratives. Some portrayed Emily as a victim of mistaken identity, while others highlighted her privileged background and questioned whether she thought she was above the law. Amidst the frenzy, Mayor Carter stepped forward, his face plastered across television screens as he condemned Mark's actions. "This is an outrage," the mayor declared during a press conference, his tone dripping with indignation. "Officer, Reynolds acted recklessly and irresponsibly. My daughter is innocent, and I will not tolerate this blatant abuse of power." His words carried weight, given his position, and they resonated with many residents who already harbored doubts about Mark's motives. Public opinion began to shift rapidly, with critics accusing Mark of overstepping his bounds and supporters urging him to stand firm. For Mark, the backlash was overwhelming. Suddenly, he found himself at the center of a storm, facing scrutiny from all directions. Friends stopped calling, colleagues avoided eye contact, and strangers glared at him in the grocery store. Yet despite the mounting pressure, Mark refused to apologize or retract his decision. Deep down, he knew he had done the right thing, and that knowledge gave him the strength to keep moving forward even as the walls closed in around him. The events that unfolded after Mark's decision to arrest Emily Carter turned what should have been a routine incident into a whirlwind of controversy, drama, and political maneuvering. What began as a simple theft accusation quickly escalated into something far bigger than anyone could have anticipated, especially Mark himself. When Mark arrived at the boutique that evening, he was focused solely on doing his job. He had no idea that the young woman standing in front of him, clutching her expensive handbag and glaring defiantly, would become the center of a media firestorm. As soon as he placed Emily under arrest, the atmosphere shifted. The shop owner looked relieved, finally feeling vindicated after hours of frustration. But Emily, she was livid. "You're making a huge mistake," she spat, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Do you even realize who I am? My father is the mayor of this town. You think you can just waltz in here and ruin my life because of some stupid misunderstanding?" Mark remained calm, though her words stung more than he cared to admit. He reminded himself that people often reacted emotionally when faced with legal trouble. Still, there was an edge to Emily's tone, a sense of entitlement, that made it clear she wasn't used to being challenged. Most people probably back down when confronted by someone like her, wealthy, powerful, accustomed to getting their way. But Mark wasn't most people. He had spent years preparing for moments like this where sticking to his principles mattered more than anything else. After securing the necklace as evidence and reading Emily her rights, Mark escorted her to his patrol car. Cameras flashed as they stepped outside. Curious onlookers had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Some snapped photos with their phones, while others whispered amongst themselves. By the time Mark locked Emily in the backseat of his cruiser, the situation had already begun spiraling out of control. Word traveled fast in a small town, especially when the mayor's daughter was involved. Within minutes, social media exploded with posts about the incident. Local news outlets picked up the story almost immediately, framing it in ways that ranged from sympathetic to sensational. Headlines like, "Mayor's daughter arrested for theft" dominated websites and television screens, accompanied by blurry images of Emily being led away in handcuffs. Comment sections buzzed with speculation, outrage, and disbelief. At first, public opinion seemed divided. Some residents sided with the shop owner, praising Mark for holding Emily accountable despite her privileged background. Others, however, rallied behind Emily, dismissing the accusations as baseless or exaggerated. These supporters painted Mark as overzealous, accusing him of targeting Emily simply because of her family's status. They argued that mistakes happen, and surely a young woman like Emily wouldn't intentionally steal something so trivial compared to her wealth. But the narrative didn't stay balanced for long. As the hours passed, Mayor Charles Carter took center stage, using his influence to shape how the story unfolded. Known for his charisma and political savvy, the mayor wasted no time addressing the public. Standing before a sea of microphones during a hastily arranged press conference, he exuded confidence and authority. His expression was one of controlled anger, designed to convey both strength and victimization. "This is not justice," the mayor declared, his voice steady but laced with indignation. "What happened tonight is nothing short of harassment. My daughter is innocent, and Officer Reynolds has abused his position of power. I will not stand idly by while our family is dragged through the mud." His words resonated deeply with many townspeople, particularly those who admired him or benefited from his policies. For years, Mayor Carter had cultivated an image of benevolence and competence, portraying himself as a leader who cared about the community. Now he leveraged that goodwill to cast doubt on Mark's actions, painting them as reckless and malicious. He called for an immediate investigation into the arrest, demanding accountability not only for Emily, but also for Mark. As the mayor's rhetoric gained traction, pressure mounted on the police department. Internal Affairs launched an inquiry into the incident, questioning whether Mark had acted appropriately. Meanwhile, whispers of misconduct began swirling around him. Anonymous sources claimed that Mark had fabricated evidence or mishandled the case, allegations that lacked proof but were repeated often enough to gain credibility. Even some of his fellow officers started distancing themselves, fearful that associating with him might tarnish their own reputations. For Mark, the fallout was suffocating. Suddenly, he found himself isolated, not just professionally, but personally as well. Friends stopped inviting him to gatherings, unsure of how to navigate the controversy surrounding him. Neighbors avoided eye contact when passing him on the street, and once familiar faces now regarded him with suspicion. At work, colleagues spoke to him in hushed tones, offering vague condolences but little support. It was as if an invisible barrier had formed between him and everyone else, separating him from the world he thought he knew. Despite the mounting criticism, Mark refused to back down. He believed wholeheartedly in the integrity of his actions and trusted that the truth would eventually prevail. Every night, he replayed the events of that fateful evening in his mind, searching for flaws in his judgment. Had he missed something? Could he have handled things differently? No matter how many times he analyzed the situation, he always came to the same conclusion. He had done everything by the book. Still, the weight of the backlash bore down heavily on him. Sleep became elusive, replaced by restless nights filled with worry and self-doubt. During the day, he tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, continuing his duties as best he could. But it wasn't easy. Everywhere he went, he felt eyes watching him, judging him. Strangers approached him in public, sometimes to offer unsolicited opinions, other times to hurl insults. Each encounter chipped away at his resolve, leaving him wondering how much longer he could endure the storm. Amidst the chaos, the shop owner, who had reported the theft, stood firmly by Mark's side. She gave interviews to local reporters, recounting the events leading up to Emily's arrest and expressing gratitude for Mark's professionalism. "He did exactly what he was supposed to do," she said during one televised interview. "I don't care who you are. If you commit a crime, you should be held accountable. Officer Reynolds didn't deserve this kind of treatment." Her words provided a glimmer of hope, a reminder that not everyone had turned against him. Yet even her steadfast support couldn't shield Mark from the overwhelming tide of hostility. As days turned into weeks, the scrutiny intensified. Protesters gathered outside the police station holding signs that read, "Justice for Emily," and chanting slogans that vilified Mark. Social media campaigns amplified the outrage, flooding platforms with hashtags and memes mocking his integrity. Through it all, Emily maintained her innocence, giving tearful interviews that portrayed her as a victim of circumstance. She claimed she had merely forgotten to pay for the necklace, insisting it was an honest mistake rather than an act of theft. Her polished demeanor and heartfelt apologies swayed many viewers, further complicating the narrative. To some, she appeared genuine, a young woman caught in a misunderstanding. To others, including Mark, her explanations rang hollow, lacking any real accountability. Behind the scenes, the mayor worked tirelessly to discredit Mark, leveraging his connections and resources to sway public opinion. He hired high-profile attorneys to represent Emily, ensuring she received top-tier legal representation. Meanwhile, he pressured city officials to expedite the investigation into Mark's conduct, hoping to secure a swift resolution that favored his family. Every move he made was calculated, designed to protect Emily at all costs, even if it meant destroying Mark's career in the process. As tensions escalated, Mark found himself caught in a battle far larger than he had ever imagined. On one side stood the Carters, wielding their wealth and influence like weapons. On the other side stood Mark, armed only with his principles and the belief that justice should apply equally to everyone, regardless of status or privilege. The odds were stacked against him, but he refused to surrender. Deep down, he knew that giving in would mean betraying not only himself, but also the oath he had sworn to uphold. And so, despite the growing pressure and relentless attacks, Mark continued to fight. He cooperated fully with the internal affairs investigation, providing detailed accounts of the incident and submitting the surveillance footage as evidence. He reached out to trusted mentors and allies, seeking guidance on how to navigate the turbulent waters ahead. Most importantly, he clung to the hope that the truth would eventually come to light, that somewhere, somehow, justice would prevail. But as the days stretched into weeks, the question lingered in the air. How much longer could Mark hold on before the storm consumed him entirely? The pressure on Mark Reynolds continued to mount as the days turned into weeks. What had started as a straightforward arrest now felt like an avalanche burying him under layers of doubt, hostility, and betrayal. Every corner he turned seemed to lead to another dead end, another person turning their back on him. The weight of the situation wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal, gnawing at his spirit and testing every ounce of resilience he possessed. Mayor Charles Carter's influence loomed large over the town, casting a shadow that reached far beyond City Hall. With each passing day, the mayor grew bolder in his crusade to discredit Mark. He held multiple press conferences, each one more dramatic than the last, painting himself as a father defending his innocent daughter against a rogue cop with a vendetta. His rhetoric was calculated, designed to tug at heartstrings while simultaneously sowing seeds of distrust toward law enforcement. "We entrust our police officers to protect us," he said during one televised appearance, his voice trembling with emotion. "But what happens when they abuse that trust? When they target innocent citizens for their own gain? These words resonated with many residents who were already predisposed to side with someone like Emily, a young woman from a prominent family, over a lone officer whose actions challenged the status quo. The media played a significant role in amplifying this narrative, running stories that highlighted Emily's perspective while downplaying or outright omitting key details about the surveillance footage and the shop owner's account. Headlines like, "Cop accuses mayor's daughter amid flawed investigation," dominated local news outlets, reinforcing the idea that Mark had overstepped his bounds. As public opinion shifted further against him, cracks began to form within the police department. Internal affairs investigators grilled Mark repeatedly, scrutinizing every decision he'd made that night. They questioned why he hadn't given Emily the benefit of the doubt, why he hadn't contacted the mayor before making the arrest, and whether he harbored any personal animosity toward the Carters. Each question felt like a jab, probing for weaknesses in his defense. Mark answered honestly and calmly, explaining that he had followed protocol to the letter. But no matter how thorough his responses, it seemed clear that the investigation was less about uncovering the truth and more about appeasing the powerful figures demanding answers. To make matters worse, some of Mark's colleagues began distancing themselves from him. In the break room, conversations would halt whenever he entered, replaced by awkward silence. Officers who once greeted him warmly now avoided eye contact, pretending to be engrossed in paperwork or scrolling through their phones. Even those who had initially supported him privately expressed concerns about associating too closely with him, fearing it might harm their careers. "You don't understand, Mark," one sergeant told him during a rare, candid moment. "This isn't just about you anymore. People are scared. They don't want to get caught in the crossfire." Mark tried not to take it personally, but the isolation was suffocating. For years, he had relied on his fellow officers as a second family, trusting them to have his back in tough situations. Now, he felt like an outsider within his own ranks. The camaraderie he once cherished had evaporated, replaced by a palpable tension that hung heavy in the air. It wasn't just about losing allies. It was about realizing how fragile loyalty could be when tested by fear and self-preservation. Outside the department, the backlash intensified. Protesters gathered regularly outside the police station, holding signs that read, "Justice for Emily," and chanting slogans accusing Mark of misconduct. Some carried megaphones, leading chants that echoed through the streets. Others filmed videos of themselves speaking out against Mark, posting them online to amplify their message. Social media campaigns gained traction, flooding platforms with hashtags like #DuckerFreeEmily and #CreorAccountabilityForCops. Memes mocking Mark's integrity circulated widely, reducing months of dedicated service to a punchline. Even strangers approached him in public, eager to share their opinions. At the grocery store, a middle-aged man confronted him in the cereal aisle, wagging a finger in his face. "You should be ashamed of yourself," the man spat. "Going after someone like Emily Carter? Do you even realize the damage you've done?" Mark bit his tongue, reminding himself that arguing wouldn't help. Still, moments like these chipped away at his resolve, leaving him wondering if anyone truly understood the position he was in. Despite the mounting criticism, Mark refused to apologize or retract his statement. Doing so would mean admitting wrongdoing where none existed, and betraying the oath he had sworn to uphold. He believed wholeheartedly that he had acted appropriately, following procedure and treating Emily the same way he would have treated anyone else accused of theft. But standing firm came at a cost. Friends stopped inviting him to gatherings, unsure of how to navigate the controversy surrounding him. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid saying hello, and acquaintances unfriended him on social media. It was as if an invisible wall had formed between him and the world he thought he knew. One of the hardest parts was watching the community he loved turn against him. Mark had always prided himself on being approachable, someone people could count on in times of need. Now he felt like a pariah, ostracized by those he had dedicated his life to protecting. Even simple interactions became fraught with tension. When he stopped at the coffee shop for his morning brew, the barista hesitated before taking his order, her smile forced and uneasy. When he attended a town hall meeting to discuss unrelated issues, Attendees shot him dirty looks, whispering, behind cupped hands. Each encounter served as a painful reminder of how quickly perceptions could shift. Amidst the chaos, the shop owner remained steadfast in her support. She gave interviews to local reporters, recounting the events leading up to Emily's arrest, and praising Mark for his professionalism. "He didn't do anything wrong," she insisted during one television segment. "If anything, Officer Reynolds deserves recognition for doing his job without bias. I only wish more people would see that." Her words provided a glimmer of hope, a reminder that not everyone had turned against him. Yet even her unwavering support couldn't shield Mark from the overwhelming tide of hostility. Behind the scenes, Mayor Carter continued pulling strings, leveraging his connections to sway public opinion and pressure city officials. He hired high-profile attorneys to represent Emily, ensuring she received top-tier legal representation. Meanwhile, he pushed for expedited investigations into Mark's conduct, hoping to secure a swift resolution that favored his family. Every move he made was strategic, designed to protect Emily at all costs, even if it meant destroying Mark's career in the process. As tensions escalated, rumors began circulating about Mark's past. Anonymous sources claimed he had falsified reports in unrelated cases, accusations that lacked evidence but gained traction nonetheless. Internal affairs investigators seized on these whispers, expanding their inquiry to include allegations that had nothing to do with the theft case. Mark found himself defending not only his actions that night but also his entire career. The stress was relentless, leaving him physically and emotionally drained. Through it all, Mark clung to the hope that the truth would eventually come to light. He cooperated fully with the investigation, providing detailed accounts of the incident and submitting the surveillance footage as evidence. He reached out to trusted mentors and allies, seeking guidance on how to navigate the turbulent waters ahead. Most importantly, he reminded himself why he had become a police officer in the first place: to serve justice, regardless of the consequences. But as the weeks stretched into months, the question lingered in the air. How much longer could Mark hold on before the storm consumed him entirely? The battle was far from over, and the outcome remained uncertain. Yet despite the odds stacked against him, Mark refused to surrender. Deep down, he knew that giving in would mean betraying not only himself, but also the principles he had spent a lifetime fighting for. And so, he pressed forward, determined to weather the storm, one grueling day at a time. As the storm surrounding Mark Reynolds continued to rage, the fractures within the police department grew wider, exposing a level of betrayal and disloyalty that Mark had never imagined possible. What began as whispers in the corridors of the station soon escalated into full-blown attempts to undermine him, orchestrated by those who were supposed to stand beside him. The situation was no longer just about the arrest of Emily Carter. It had become a battle for survival, both professionally and personally. At first, the signs of betrayal were subtle. Colleagues who once greeted him warmly now avoided making eye contact. Conversations that used to flow naturally suddenly dried up when he entered the room. Officers who had shared coffee breaks with him started finding excuses to leave whenever he approached. It wasn't overt hostility, not yet, but the silence spoke volumes. They weren't just distancing themselves. They were cutting ties, as if being associated with Mark might taint their own reputations. Mark tried to brush it off at first, telling himself that people were simply reacting to the intense scrutiny coming from above. After all, the mayor's influence reached deep into every corner of the town, including the police force. But as time went on, the cracks became impossible to ignore. One afternoon, while reviewing case files in the squad room, Mark overheard two detectives talking in hushed tones near the water cooler. Their voices were low, but not low enough. "Honestly, I don't know why he didn't just let it slide," one of them muttered, glancing around to ensure no one else was listening. "It's not like anyone was really hurt. He should have known better than to mess with someone like her." The other detective nodded in agreement. "Yeah, and now look at the mess we're all in because of him. Internal affairs breathing down our necks, the mayor breathing down their necks. It's ridiculous. Sometimes you've got to play the game, you know?" Mark froze, his pen hovering above the file in front of him. He wanted to confront them, to defend himself and explain that doing the right thing shouldn't be seen as messing with anyone. but he knew it wouldn't do any good. These weren't conversations rooted in logic or fairness. They were driven by fear. Fear of losing promotions, fear of angering the wrong people, fear of becoming the next target. What hurt most was realizing how quickly loyalty could evaporate under pressure. For years, Mark had considered many of his fellow officers friends, people he trusted to watch his back in dangerous situations. Now those same individuals were treating him like a liability. Some even went so far as to spread rumors, whispering behind closed doors about supposed misconduct in unrelated cases. Fabricated stories circulated about falsified reports, mishandled evidence, and other fabricated accusations, all designed to paint Mark as incompetent and untrustworthy. One particularly painful moment came during a meeting with Captain Harris, Mark's direct superior. The captain had always been supportive of Mark in the past, praising his dedication and work ethic, but this time the tone was different. As they sat in the cramped confines of the captain's office, surrounded by shelves groaning under the weight hit send to continue generating, the betrayal within the police department reached its peak when fabricated evidence began surfacing against Mark Reynolds. What had started as whispers and rumors evolved into tangible accusations, meticulously crafted to dismantle his career and his life. The storm that had been brewing for weeks finally broke, leaving Mark caught in a torrent of lies and deceit orchestrated by those who sought to protect their own interests. It began subtly enough, a missing file here, an altered report there. At first, Mark dismissed these anomalies as clerical errors or oversights. But as more discrepancies emerged, it became clear that something far more sinister was at play. Internal affairs investigators, already under immense pressure from Mayor Carter, seized upon these inconsistencies with alarming speed. They presented Mark with documents supposedly proving he had falsified reports in unrelated cases, accusations that bore no resemblance to reality, but carried enough weight to cast serious doubt on his integrity. One particularly damning piece of evidence came in the form of a memo, allegedly written by Mark himself. The document detailed instructions for tampering with evidence in a minor traffic violation case years earlier, a case so insignificant that most people had forgotten about it entirely. According to the memo, Mark had supposedly coerced a junior officer into altering witness statements to favor the driver involved, all to avoid potential backlash from influential figures in the community. The language in the memo was eerily precise, mimicking Mark's usual style down to the smallest detail. It was almost convincing, except for one glaring flaw: Mark had never written it. When confronted with the alleged memo during an internal affairs hearing, Mark felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He stared at the paper in disbelief, his mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing. "This isn't mine," he said firmly, though his voice betrayed a hint of frustration. "I've never seen this before." The investigator sitting across from him raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Are you denying that you authored this document?" he asked, tapping the paper for emphasis. "Yes, I am," Mark replied, his jaw tightening. "Someone forged it. Whoever did this is trying to frame me." But the investigator wasn't swayed. "That's quite a claim, Officer Reynolds. Do you have any proof to support it?" Mark hesitated, realizing how hollow his words sounded without evidence to back them up. How could he prove something didn't exist? How could he defend himself against charges built on lies designed to destroy him? The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. For the first time, Mark truly understood the depth of the trap being set for him. As the investigation progressed, additional allegations surfaced, each one more damaging than the last. Anonymous sources, likely planted by allies of the mayor, came forward with stories of misconduct spanning Mark's entire career. Some claimed he had accepted bribes from local businesses in exchange for turning a blind eye to minor infractions. Others accused him of planting drugs on suspects to secure convictions. None of these claims held water under scrutiny, but they didn't need to. In the court of public opinion, perception mattered more than truth. The media latched onto these new developments with fervor, running sensational headlines like "Cop accused of decades-long corruption scheme" and "Officer Reynolds faces Multiple charges amid scandal. Television pundits debated whether Mark was a rogue cop abusing his power or simply a scapegoat caught in a larger political game. Social media exploded with reactions, ranging from outrage to mockery, further fueling the narrative that Mark was guilty until proven innocent. For Mark, the toll was unbearable. Each accusation chipped away at his credibility, eroding the foundation of trust he had spent years building. Friends who had once stood by him quietly faded into the background, unwilling to risk association with someone labeled a criminal. Even family members grew distant, unsure of how to reconcile the man they knew with the image painted by the press. Isolation became his constant companion, a suffocating presence that followed him wherever he went. Work became unbearable too. Once a place where he felt purpose and pride, the police station now felt like enemy territory. Colleagues avoided him openly, treating him like a pariah. Supervisors scrutinized his every move, searching for excuses to justify disciplinary action. Captain Harris, who had once praised Mark's dedication, now looked at him with thinly veiled disdain. During one particularly tense meeting, the captain warned Mark that resistance would only make things worse. "You're digging your own grave, Reynolds," Captain Harris said bluntly, leaning back in his chair. "If you'd just admit fault and apologize, maybe we could salvage something here. But continuing to deny everything, that's not going to end well for you." Mark clenched his fists beneath the table, fighting the urge to lash out. "I'm not admitting to something I didn't do," he shot back, his voice steady despite the anger simmering inside him. "You know me, sir. You know I wouldn't fabricate evidence or take bribes. Why won't anyone believe me?" Captain Harris sighed, shaking his head. "Belief doesn't matter anymore, son. Perception does, and right now the perception is that you're guilty." Those words haunted Mark long after the meeting ended. They echoed in his mind as he drove home in silence, replayed themselves in his dreams, and lingered in the quiet moments when he allowed himself to think about the future. If even those closest to him doubted his innocence, what hope did he have of convincing anyone else? Despite the mounting odds, Mark refused to give up. He poured countless hours into gathering evidence to disprove the allegations, combing through old case files and reaching out to former colleagues for support. Some were hesitant to help, fearing retaliation, but a few loyal individuals stepped forward, offering testimonies that corroborated his version of events. Slowly, painstakingly, Mark pieced together a defense aimed at exposing the truth. His efforts weren't enough to sway the Internal Affairs Board, however. After months of hearings, deliberations, and relentless scrutiny, the decision came down. Mark was found guilty of misconduct. The verdict sent shockwaves through the town, cementing the narrative that he was a corrupt officer undeserving of his badge. Stripped of his position and facing criminal charges, Mark prepared for the next phase of his ordeal: trial. The courtroom was packed on the day of sentencing, filled with reporters, curious townsfolk, and several high-profile attendees, including Mayor Carter. Cameras flashed as Mark entered, flanked by his attorney. He kept his head held high, refusing to show weakness despite the overwhelming weight of the situation. Inside, he felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, frustration, but above all, determination. No matter the outcome, he vowed to continue fighting for justice. When the judge delivered the sentence, 4 years in prison, Mark felt a strange sense of detachment. Part of him had expected this result. The system had already turned against him, leaving little room for redemption. As bailiffs led him away in handcuffs, he glanced toward the gallery, catching sight of Emily Carter sitting beside her father. Her expression was unreadable, neither triumphant nor remorseful. It was as if she had already moved on, leaving the wreckage behind without a second thought. In the days that followed, Mark's world shrank to the confines of a prison cell. The transition was brutal, physically, emotionally, and mentally. Gone were the freedoms he had taken for granted: walking outside, choosing his meals, deciding how to spend his time. Instead, he faced long days of monotony punctuated by brief moments of tension. Fellow inmates eyed him warily, some out of curiosity, others with hostility. Being a former cop made him a target, and he quickly learned to tread carefully, Yet, even in the darkest moments, Mark clung to a sliver of hope. Somewhere, somehow, he believed the truth would come to light. The same principles that had guided him throughout his career, the belief in fairness, accountability, and justice, kept him going. He reminded himself daily that while the road ahead might be long and arduous, giving up wasn't an option. Not for him, not for the values he had sworn to uphold. And so, as the cell door clanged shut behind him each night, Mark resolved to endure. The battle was far from over, and though the odds remained stacked against him, he refused to surrender. Deep down, he knew that standing firm in the face of adversity was the only way to reclaim his honor, and perhaps someday restore faith in the system he had dedicated his life to serving.